on the Jewish calendars, it says, a visionary, probably writing in the Persian or early Hellenistic age under the name of the Pre-Diluvian Enoch, suggested the religious calendar of 364 days, or 52 weeks, based on the week in which all festivals always fall on the same weekday. His day was later taken up by the Qumran community. Now, notice this, that it says that this person, writing under the pre-Diluvian name Enoch, he was writing in the Persian or early Hellenistic age. Now, that's around 300 BC. And he proposed the 364-day calendar, which is divisible by 7, so that all of the feasts would come on the same day of the month. The same day of the week, I'm sorry. So this shows that the Jews did not keep the feasts in order that they would come on the same day of the week every year. But with a lunar calendar, that's a lunar Sabbath, I should say, that is what would happen. The feast would always fall on the same day of the week, because there's a specific date given, the 15th of the first month, the 15th of the 7th month. Those days would always be a Sabbath if the lunar Sabbaths were correct. But this pre-Diluvian man writing with the pre-Diluvian name Enoch was suggesting that they should have a calendar of 364 days that would cause the feasts to line up with the week so they'd always fall on the same day of the week. Now that would be completely disconnected from the moon, and so it would definitely not jive with what the Bible says about the new moons and the feast coming on the 15th of the month from the new moon and so on. That wouldn't happen with this Enoch calendar. I'd like to look at the Enoch calendar. Here's an actual picture of how the Enoch calendar worked. He was trying to put 30 days in every month. There was always 30 days, and then there was an extra day in each quarter. So there were 4 extra days throughout the year, and what that would do is it would throw it off according to the moon, but it would keep it in line with the week, so that the festivals would always happen on the same day of the week. The fact that this person wrote and tried to promote this 300 years before Christ, and then the Qumran community took up this calendar and started keeping this calendar, and we find that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, this proves that the Jews generally were not keeping this calendar. They were not keeping a calendar that coincided the week with the dates of the month, or the festivals landing on the same day of the week. They varied. They would land on any day of the week. Okay, I'd like to read a quote now from, this is from a website called crystallinks.com, the Jewish calendar. And it says here, the new year begins on Tishri 1, which may be the day of the Molad of Tishri, but is often delayed by 1 or 2 days for various reasons. Thus, in order to prevent the Day of Atonement, Tishri 10, from falling on a Friday or a Sunday, and the 7th day of Tabernacles, Tishri 21, from falling on a Saturday, the new year must avoid commencing on Sundays, Wednesdays, or Fridays. Again, if the Molad of Tishri occurs at noon or later, the new year is delayed by 1, or, if this would cause it to fall as above, 2 days. So I want you to notice that the Jews, we know they were jealously guarding the Sabbath. They thought very highly of the Sabbath. And here they determined the beginning of their year based on the Sabbath. If it would conflict with their Sabbath, they would change the day the year began based on this. And this is the way it's still calculated today. The Jews start their years so that the Day of Atonement would never fall on a Friday or a Sunday. It could fall on Sabbath, but never on a Friday or Sunday, because that would make a 2-day Sabbath, because the Day of Atonement was a Sabbath day, a annual Sabbath. Actually, the only annual Sabbath there was, the only annual Shabbat, was on the 10th day of the 7th month, and so they were trying to avoid that Shabbat day for 2 Shabbat days to happen in a row. And it's interesting, too, that they only are concerned about that Shabbat day, the Day of Atonement. There's no other Shabbat day or Shabbaton day that they're concerned about. In fact, in the Jewish calendar, the 15th day of the month, of the first month, which is a Shabbaton day, it can fall on Friday or Sunday. They weren't concerned about that. That's fine, because that's not a Shabbat day. They were allowed to do work there, just not servile work. So to have a Shabbaton day followed by a Shabbat day was never a problem. It's still not a problem. They allow that to happen, but they would never allow 2 Shabbat days to fall in one day after the other. So that's just interesting that they base their year on the Sabbath rather than the other way around. They don't change the Sabbath to fit their year. Now, I'd like to read another quote from, comes from the Wikipedia, and it says that there were 2 major forms of the calendar have been used. Before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the start of each month was based on the observation of the new crescent. Witnesses would be required to testify that they had seen the new crescent, which would signify the start of the new month. Between 70 and 1178 CE, a rule-based system was adopted. The principles were fully described by Maimonides in 1178 CE. That's from the Wikipedia Encyclopedia, the Hebrew calendar. So we find that there was a change. I'd like to read another quote. There's a change in the way they reckon their months. Here's another quote. It says, the period between 70 and 1178 was a transition period between the 2 forms, with the gradual adoption of more and more of the rules characteristic of the modern form. Except for the modern year number, the modern rules reached their final form before 820 or 921, with some uncertainty regarding when. The modern Hebrew calendar cannot be used to calculate biblical dates because new moon dates may be in error by up to 4 days, and months may be in error by up to 4 months. The latter accounts for the irregular intercalation, adding of extra months. That was performed in 3 successive years in the early 2nd century, according to the Talmud. So you notice there, it says that when the 2 forms of the calendars are adopted, the calendar that the Jews keep today is different. They don't reckon the new moon the same as they used to. Before the destruction of Jerusalem, they counted the calendar by the new visible crescent. That was the new moon day, and then their months started from there. And their feasts were all based upon that calculation. But now, today, they keep it by the invisible new moon, when there is no visible crescent, and they keep it by calculations rather than by observation. So there was a change, and as this quote pointed out, you cannot accurately determine biblical dates based on the current Jewish calendar, because they didn't calculate the dates back then the same way. They calculated it by the visible crescent. And so if you use today's reckoning to calculate those dates back before 70 AD, you can be off by up to 4 days, one way or the other, and you can be off by 4 months. So it's a very unstable way of calculating it, because the visible crescent could happen at different times. Now, I'd like to read another quote, and this comes from crystallinks.com, the Jewish calendar. And here it says, once decided, the beginning of each Hebrew month was first announced to other communities by signal fires lit on mountaintops. But after the Samaritans and Bethusians began to light false fires, a shaliach was sent. The inability of the shaliach to reach communities outside Israel within 1 day led outlying communities to celebrate scriptural festivals for 2 days rather than for 1, observing the second feast day of the Jewish diaspora because of uncertainty whether the previous month was 29 or 30 days. So notice what happened, that the people who were relying on observation of the moon, they didn't understand whether the month was 29 or 30 days, so they would keep festivals 2 days in a row because it was uncertain by just observation whether the day started on one day or the next day. They were relying upon the Jewish leaders to tell them when the new month started. So the observation method was not very reliable. They were uncertain when the month really started, just based on what they could see. So they had to rely on the Jews to tell them when it started. Now, there was a 8-day week used by the Romans. Constantine made a change from the 8-day week to the 7-day week. The 7-day week became official